Hello and good evening. From Islamabad, bringing you clarity on global affairs, this is Inside Foreign Affairs with Kamran Yousaf. Tonight, we will be discussing two major developments of the week. First, the Middle East war enters its second month with no clear path to peace despite high-level efforts and missed opportunities. And second, critical talks between Pakistan, Afghanistan and China, where Islamabad has made it clear counter-terrorism remains non-negotiable. Let's begin with the top story. The war in the Middle East has now entered its second month and there is still no clear end in sight. This week briefly raised hopes for a possible breakthrough when President Donald Trump announced that he would address the nation. Speculation surged that Washington might unveil a roadmap to end the conflict or at least signal a timeline. But the speech instead deepened uncertainty, raising more questions than answers and adding to the sense of chaos surrounding the war.
Thanks to the progress we've made, I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong. In the meantime, discussions are ongoing. Regime change was not our goal. We never said regime change, but regime change has occurred because of all of their original leaders' death. They're all dead.
Meanwhile, Islamabad remains at the center of quiet but critical diplomatic efforts aimed at de-escalation. Officials here say back-channel contacts are ongoing, but the chances of an immediate breakthrough remain slim. In fact, Pakistan came close not once but twice to brokering a high-level meeting between US and Iranian officials in Islamabad. Both times, the efforts collapsed at the last minute, largely due to deepening mistrust between Washington and Tehran. Despite these setbacks, Pakistan has not abandoned diplomacy, even as the window for negotiated settlement appears to be narrowing rapidly. This week also saw China stepping in more actively. Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Senator Ishaq Dar traveled to Beijing as part of those efforts. China has backed Pakistan's mediation role, and together the two countries unveiled a 5-point peace framework that includes immediate cessation of hostilities, launch of structured peace talks, protection of civilian infrastructure under international law, ensuring security of global shipping lanes, upholding the primacy of the UN Charter. However, even as Pakistan pushes diplomacy, it has drawn a clear line. Islamabad chose to skip a key meeting hosted by the United Kingdom on the Strait of Hormuz. The gathering, attended by over 40 countries, aimed to discuss restoring maritime traffic through one of the world's most critical oil choke points. Since the start of the war, Iran has effectively controlled the Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly 1/5 of the global oil supply passes. The UK initiative sought to build a multinational maritime security coalition. Pakistan, however, declined, signaling it will not join any military or security arrangement that risk escalating tension further. Now to the second important story of the week. While Middle East diplomacy dominates headlines, another key development quietly. Pakistan, Afghanistan and China held talks in Urumqi amid tensions. The meeting brokered by Beijing was seen as an attempt to stabilize relationship. But Pakistan made one thing clear: talks will not come at the cost of security. Islamabad has not softened its stance. Officials say Pakistan has demanded that the Afghan Taliban formally declare TTP a terrorist organization, dismantle its network, provide verifiable proof of action. China, meanwhile, confirmed that three sides reached a consensus on future engagement, though details remain limited for now. For more analysis on the other side of the break, I will be joined by seasoned Pakistani diplomat, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Now we are joined by one of Pakistan's seasoned diplomat, Pakistan's former foreign secretary, who is currently President of Institute of Regional Studies, Ambassador Jauhar Saleem. Ambassador Jauhar Saleem, many thanks indeed for joining us tonight on Inside Foreign Affairs.
It's a pleasure.
Let me begin first by asking this, I think, unprecedented development that Iran has reportedly shot down F-15, a U.S. fighter jet, and this is the first instance since the war began that Iran has shot down an U.S. aircraft over its airspace. So, how significant do you think this development is?
I do think it's quite significant because this is the first confirmed report, because there have been claims previously as well, but this time this has been verified. So I think that means what? It means that the U.S. does not have air supremacy. Okay, they do have air superiority, but they do not have total air supremacy. So now this bombing campaign, which is ongoing, both for the U.S. and Israel, I think they'll have to sort of reevaluate their sort of sorties and the whole mission, perhaps, because on the one hand, yes, it has to be said that even with the best fighter crafts in the world, there is never a zero risk. There's always some risk of a plane being shot down. And sometimes that can happen with very unsophisticated technologies as well. We do not really have the details of what exactly transpired, but you would probably recall that, when Americans bombed Serbia at one point during the Kosovo War, they lost one or two stealth aircrafts there, and those were lost basically to anti-aircraft fires. So in this case, we do not know what led to the shooting down of these. The Iranians are claiming two aircrafts, of course. They're claiming an F-35, but what is confirmed so far is it's an F-15. Nevertheless, it is a significant development, and I think that in the coming days, if there's an indication that the risk for the U.S. aircrafts and the Israeli aircrafts has increased, even if it is to a just a kind of 10 or 15% or even much lower than usual threshold, because this is already an asymmetric warfare situation. I think that could really change nature of their bombing campaign there.
That leads me to another critical and a political question, because often during such conflicts where a superpower is involved, we have instances that such events can actually determine the trajectory of this conflict. Do you think that this single incident can determine that where this conflict could go? Either U.S. could escalate further, or this may put enormous pressure on President Trump and he will be thinking of just ramping it off and exit this war?
I believe just one instance, although it is significant, very significant, but at the same time, probably because, these plans are made in advance, so they're not just going to shelve all the plans that they've made just because of one or two shootings. But at the same time, I think they would be reevaluating their strategy from here on. So what we might see is a kind of course correction, a revision, more thoughtful, strategizing on the part of the U.S. Because when you come up with your war strategy or war tactics, then you do evaluate the adversary's potential, and that needs to be reevaluated now, because this potential of shooting any aircraft being shot was not there before. So this is something new in a way. Like I said, of course, there's never a zero risk situation. In any war like this, which has been ongoing for so many weeks, it's not improbable that you lose one or two planes, and this could just actually, it's definitely not an accident. It was shot down, but the fact is that there are multiple ways of shooting down aircraft. If even a shoulder-fired missile could have done that, or their S-300 system could have done that. The SAMs that they have, because Iranians do have a sort of, they also have a multi-layered defense. It's in no way comparable to what the Israelis have, the Iron Dome, the David Sling, and sort of, the arrow batteries. But it's much less advanced, but it's still there. So, before this defense that they have was not posing any threat to the US or Israeli aircraft. But it seems that has changed. Now, some analysts might even think, what if, some of the countries that might be helping them at this point in time, what if they have infused certain new weaponry? That is a thought which would cross, the minds of any analyst from the US side as well. Because that could really change things if that has happened. But I think we really need to get more details before we could jump to some definite conclusions at this point in time.
You talked about getting more details at this point as we speak. Of course, that one pilot, of course, was rescued. The other crew member is missing at the moment, and we know that the search is going on. Both the Iranians and Americans are trying to find out that the other missing member. So, hypothetical question, imagine that if Iranians are able to capture that other American crew member alive, how devastating this could be for President Trump. Imagine that they will be, placing in front of the cameras the Iranian media, how that image will go back to the world and particularly to the Americans.
Yesterday I was in a program, on a TV program, where they had a journalist from Iran as well. And in fact, he was the one who broke the news before the media, before it was there on the media. He claimed that, okay, we just got the news that they've shot down 2 planes. And he also said that they had, as per his reports, they had like 1 pilot, American pilot. And but subsequently, of course, but the media reports suggest that the Iranians are still searching for that as well, and as the Americans are too. But let's say, hypothetically speaking, in the instance that the Iranians are able to capture that pilot, I think the optics of that would be really bad for America, because let's say if the Iranians have it and they present that pilot to the media, and that would not go well in the US. That would not go well for all the claims that President Trump the statements that he's made. Although it's just 1 pilot, but still that, because we are living in a media age, and you would all recall that when Pakistan was able to capture 1 Indian pilot, Abhinandan, the optics of that could have cost Modi an election. And that is why, there's been too much diplomacy brought into action to somehow get that pilot released, because just that particular person, that particular captive, so to speak, could have changed the course of an election in India. So I think, the political ramifications of that would be very significant.
And also, I think, given the fact that now I'm sure that Indians must have realized that why in last May, when the neutral observers and the outside world was really praising Pakistan, because shooting down a fighter aircraft is always an unprecedented development, as you can see that all other developments right now that is happening in the Middle East actually have been overshadowed by this one instance. And so one can imagine that Pakistan have actually shot down not 1, but 7 Indian aircraft. So moving away from the battlefield to the diplomatic front, of course, that Pakistan has been at the center of the diplomatic efforts. There were reports that Pakistan perhaps were close to brokering some kind of meeting between the US and the Iranian officials, but so far that did not happen. And we are getting reports that probably that window is closing. What is your view? Do you think that those diplomatic efforts being led by Pakistan apparently now have met a dead end?
I wouldn't say that. I think Pakistan is in a unique position because Pakistan has great relations with Iran, with Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries, with the US. Pakistan is very much trusted by other countries as well. But we have exemplary relations with China as well, with Russia, good relations, and with many other major powers in the world who would be directly or indirectly interested in this whole issue. So in that way, I think Pakistan, and that is why in recent days we saw that diplomacy taking place and Pakistan playing a pivotal role. Yes, as it is said, there's many a slip between the cup and the lip. The peace has been sort of elusive, ceasefire has been elusive so far, but like this, what has happened now will only intensify the diplomacy, the ongoing diplomacy, and some of that is in public view, but much of that may not be in public view. Okay, the Americans and Iranians, I believe, they are also interacting directly at the, and that happens normally, at the level of the sort of the intel, the intelligence agencies. It's quite possible, and but at the same time, you're having dialogue through other countries as well, because you see, some days ago, I'd also mentioned that, my sort of, assessment that China would get involved in this diplomacy in a more significant manner. And that is what we saw subsequently happening. Like now China is getting more involved in that. And that's the case. Why? Because China is one country in the world which has probably the most leverage on Iran. It buys 90% of Iranian oil, and also it supplies Iran all the materials that it needs. And, for a lot of products they develop, including the defense production that they have. So good relations with Iran, they are key to Iran's economic survival. And that is why China has a leverage, and China has a very big stake in it, in all this as well.
Ambassador Jauhar Saleem, if you allow me, you're absolutely right that China is obviously now, one of the big powers, and we also saw that Pakistani foreign minister this week traveled to Beijing, and after that, both countries issued a 5-point framework, of course, which clearly supports diplomatic efforts. But I also, before I conclude, want to discuss another important issue as far as Pakistan is concerned. And again, China here has a main role. As you know, that our relationship with Afghanistan are currently at the lowest, and the reasons that we already know. But this week we saw that China somehow convinced both Pakistan and the Taliban regime to come to the negotiating table. They held discussions in Urumqi, of course, again, which is very significant that they they actually opted for that city. And after that, of course, the Chinese foreign ministry is saying that talks were held in a positive atmosphere, and there was consensus that the process should go on. Given the differences between the two countries and the issues involved, how optimistic you are that this latest push by China to broker some kind of deal between Pakistan and the Taliban regime can be successful?
Well, this is not the first time, obviously, because you recall that China had at one point invited the two foreign ministers, the Pakistan foreign minister, deputy prime minister, and the Afghan foreign minister, to China. And, a dialogue took place there. And after that, there was a sort of, a significant statement which emerged. But unfortunately, the Afghans didn't really keep their promises. And that has been the crux of the problem, because all the commitments that they've made, all the promises they've made, they've not kept those. I believe that, Afghanistan has to understand that, it is in Afghanistan's own interest to allow rather these terrorist organizations which are operating from there any space in Afghanistan, to have good relations with Pakistan and other countries around it, and focus on economic development, connectivity, and sort of, because in in Afghanistan, the economic situation is right now it's one of probably the most vulnerable country in the world. 75% of the population is below poverty line. And when you have that type of poverty and that type of economic deprivation, you cannot have a stable governance. So they have to understand. And also, Afghanistan has so much natural resources. an amazing magnitude of minerals and an amazing geographical location as well. It could be the connector between regions, particularly Central Asia and South Asia. There's so many projects which are pending just because there's instability there. So I think we hope we should stay sanguine, but at the same time we have to be cautious given the past experience, because unfortunately again and again our commitments, there have been sort of setbacks and very serious setbacks. But this time around, because the way Pakistan is, in a very calibrated manner, Pakistan is using all it, and that's something that I've been saying for quite some time now, that Pakistan has to use all its leverages, the economic leverage, the military leverage, the kinetic leverage, of course, and the diplomatic leverage to manage this issue. And I think China can play a very important role in that, because China, China can be the guarantor. Because, if the problem is of credibility, if the problem is of trust deficit, then you need a mediator who has the capacity to be a guarantor, or at least, so some country which both Pakistan and Afghanistan respect and trust. So I believe that this is a very positive development, but it's only the coming days and months which will tell us how far the the regime in Afghanistan is serious about their commitments.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Jauhar Saleem, joining us and giving your insights. And he is absolutely right that it all depends on the Taliban regime because, of course, as you know, that Pakistan has no other issue except that this issue of cross-border terrorism. And if the Taliban regime addresses that, of course, that both countries can improve their relationship. That's it tonight from Inside Foreign Affairs. Do join us next week. Thanks for watching.